Good evening. So,
Come on, Lee.
For the delay, guys. Few technical issues. I did say that this is the first time I've done this, but welcome to the first episode of Trust TV. Trust TV is going to be a new regular show brought to you by Newcastle United Supporters Trust, during which, what we call it, various board members from the Trust will be jumping online to talk about all things Newcastle United, to talk about the things that matter to our members, what's the latest hot topic, whether that be obviously ticketing, whether that be safe standing, match day experience and things along those lines. We're going to be aiming to do these probably once or twice a month to begin with, depending on how they go, what have you. But one of the reasons we've decided to do this is because of the fact that over the course of the past few months, a lot of the feedback we've had from N.U.S.T members is that they would like more engagement with the board of the Trust. It was great to see so many people at the AGM at St James's Park back in January, but feedback is they'd like to have more engagement with the board. So we're going to be doing more of these sort of things on YouTube. We are going to be looking to arrange some face-to-face events in the area for people to actually attend and come and meet and chat about all things at Newcastle United. And we're going to be far more active, I think, on social media. I think it's fair to say, and we've already seen that over the course of the past few days, interacting, I think, more than we have done previously. We're also going to be We've recently just launched the new website. I hope everybody's had an opportunity to take a look at that. NUFCtrust.co.uk. The previous website, I think we all understood that it was a little bit dated. It wasn't user-friendly. Ultimately, it wasn't fit for purpose. So we've had that refreshed and updated. And on there, you'll be able to find things like member updates. You'll be able to find what are the latest events, what's going on, what we're working on. Provide feedback on those things that we're working on and give people updates and what have you. So for tonight's first Trust TV episode, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by Paul Carter. I think, Paul, you joined the Trust board in December, is that right?
I did indeed, yes. So I'm pretty new to this.
Not as new as I am to doing this.
You didn't, come on, you should have told people that we were talking to each other for 10 minutes without pressing the go live button.
Yeah, we weren't talking for 10 minutes prior to this, were we, about thinking we were live? And also joined by Greg Tomlinson, who's been a member of the board for quite some time now. Greg.
I have, yes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been here since 2019 when Alex got a band together to relaunch the Trust. So yeah, old hat, including a bit of time as the chair there as well. But now happily a board member serving up my last elected term.
And when does that term come to an end, Greg?
Another 2 years. So I've got a while yet.
So as I say, what you call it, one thing that we do want to do, we want the members of the Supporters Trust to drive the topics that we are going to talk about on this show. So we will be led by you guys. Contact us via social media, drop us an email, board@nufctrust.co.uk if there's a specific topic you would like us to talk about. But because it's the first episode, we needed to find something to talk about, and where better to start than at the Bournemouth away game last night. Another draw for Eddie Howe's Mags. And I think it's fair to say that online on social media, there was a little bit of angst last night about the performance, which I think is absolutely fair. But Paul, coming to you first, how do you think it went last night?
I think it was a hard battle point, to be honest. Was that our best performance that we've seen this season? Absolutely not. Probably our worst performance of the season, let's be honest, in terms of our high press, in terms of our passing. I thought passing out of defence wasn't amazing. I thought passing through midfield was poor as well. But you know what? We came away with it with a hard-earned point. A couple of injuries there. Willock being injured looked a naughty one. Wasn't sure about St. Maximum injury, to be honest. We'll find that out for the weekend, I suppose. But I thought Gordon looked lively when he came on. He's quick, isn't he? He looked direct. I think he'll score some goals for us, which is great. But I think we just, I think we all know that we need a deeper squad, and that is obviously coming, but we're only effectively 3 windows in. So, if you're giving me 4th at a Carabao Cup Final 12 months ago, I'm pretty sure every person watching and everyone in Newcastle fan base would, maybe apart from Alex, would have snapped your hands off. Alex won't, didn't he? But realistically, we are where we are. We've won 10, drawn 11, and lost one game. That's a record Premier League, undefeated from 17 for us now, with a little bit of revenge on our minds coming for Saturday. So 1-1 draw, happy with that. Should have won it, but we weren't good enough to win it, really. So we move on. We move on to Saturday now, and then the final.
I think the general consensus is that we are obviously in the midst of a downturn in form. But what we talked about before we actually really went live, I'll just repeat that. For me, this is a downturn in form since we returned from the World Cup, where I think we've drawn 5 and won 2. Yet we still, despite being in the middle of a downturn in form, we still haven't lost. Now, if that's a downturn in form compared to previous seasons where downturn in forms usually ended in Newcastle getting walloped 3, 4s and 5s on a regular basis, I'll accept a downturn in form where we're still not losing games. Hopefully, we can get ourselves out of that downturn next Saturday at Liverpool, St James's Park. Saturday night is going to be absolutely bouncing. But coming back to the Bournemouth game, one of the things I noticed last night from a Newcastle perspective, Dan Burn, he's come in for quite a bit of criticism online, on social media over the course of the past 24 hours. But one thing that I took from yesterday, he didn't seem to be quite there mentally. There was a couple of incidents which we're not used to seeing with any of our players, never mind Dan Burn. One, for example, where the ball went out for a throw-in. The ball went into the Newcastle fans, and Dan Burn got quite agitated and quite angry because he wasn't getting the ball back quickly, which I thought was a little bit strange. Obviously, he was keen to get the ball back into play. But then in the last minute, everybody will have seen it where Dan Burn literally stopped. He was very annoyed with something. I don't know what it was, but to the point where he just stopped and threw his arms up in the air. And had it not been for Trippier on the line, we could have been at the end of a 2-1 defeat. So something wasn't quite right with him last night. But I think, as you say, we started quite sloppily. First 20 minutes, we gave Bournemouth an opportunity to get into the game and get the fans involved in the game, and we never quite recovered from that. I think it was fair to say you could see in Eddie Howe's post-match presser, he was livid, he was foaming at the mouth, basically. He wasn't happy. He's never going to sort of lose it the way Nathan Jones potentially might do publicly, but you could see he wasn't happy and something wasn't quite right. But again, just to reiterate the point, we didn't lose. Greg, what are your thoughts on last night? You on mute, Greg? There we go. You're still on mute, Greg.
I can't lip read.
There we go. There we go. To find the mute button. It's different to where it is when you're on Teams at work, isn't it? Blimey. Apologies, I couldn't find the mute button. I think Paul's hit the nail on the head, really. In terms of how we played yesterday, I think from my perspective, though, it's 1 win in 6, yet we're still 4th. We're still exactly 10 points behind Arsenal. If we can turn these draws into more wins, then it's still exactly in our hands, really, in terms of what we do and where we finished. I think a lot of teams are going to really struggle post World Cup. A very stop-start season for those who didn't have a lot of players at the World Cup, and still a broken season and more games for those that were at the World Cup. So, I'm not too disheartened with where we are now. In fact, I'm absolutely delighted, as I think you both explained, really. So, let's turn some of those draws into wins. The biggest concern for me is we're not scoring goals like we were before the World Cup. And if we can put that right, then hopefully we'll be okay. Bruno is a massive miss. We know that he completely basically ticks on how we play. And I think the other thing is two big differences now. Teams are setting up quite often, effectively 11 men behind the ball to play that block against us, which is different to how a lot of teams were setting up at the start of the season against us. And pressure. You're talking about Dan Burn yesterday. The pressure now is completely different to the first half of the season. But it's still the Cup Final in a couple of weeks. Hopefully we can beat Liverpool next week. Hopefully, I think we might have a decent chance. Liverpool aren't going to sit back and just defend. So hopefully we can get 3 points and get a bit of momentum. And once we start getting those wins again, I'm sure they'll flow again like they did in the first half of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just looking through the comments and what have you, and I can see obviously there's a lot of people keen to talk about ticketing, which is what we expected. But before we come on to ticketing, we will come on to ticketing. We will look at some of the questions and get them up on screen. One thing I will say before we even get to that stage is we will not have all of the answers to every question. Yeah, what we will do, if we can field the question, we will field the question. But what you can be assured of is if we can't answer the question, we will try and take that question away. And if anybody wants to contact us to follow up on their question, if we're not able to answer it this evening, drop us a line at board@nufctrust.co.uk. But as I say, we will come to those questions. We'll pop them up on screen and we'll just chew the fat over them. Okay, we do have a short video from the co-chair of the Supporters Trust that we will play, and hopefully that'll put a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of the consultation period. But again, we will come on to that, so please hold your water for us if you can just give us another 5 or 10 minutes. Moving on to the next thing we wanted to talk about this evening, guys. Big news last Tuesday was the fact that Newcastle United had once again taken ownership of Strawberry Place. Now, this has obviously been a bone of contention for many Newcastle fans, myself included, since 2019, when I think Mike Ashley contrived to sell the land via his son-in-law or whoever that might have been for private development, hotels and restaurants and casinos and the like and what have you. So when that news broke last week, I think I wasn't the only Newcastle supporter to be absolutely overjoyed at the fact that the club had taken ownership of the land again, and the possibilities about what the club might be looking to do that are obviously endless. But Greg, I know when the planning permission was submitted for the private development, you were quite heavily involved in the objections that the trust put into the county council in relation to that. Do you want to give us a little bit more info?
Yeah, can do. So give a bit of background really on this, and it's something that's actually the trust were involved in even before I got involved a long time ago, over quite a long time really. So basically, Mike Ashley, in his wisdom, decided to, so that the leasehold, so the freehold is owned by Nexus. The leasehold was the club bought many years ago when it was planning all sorts of things, and super casinos were in town and all sorts. You might remember quite a while ago, the club bought that leasehold. Mike Ashley, in his wisdom, decided to sell it to himself from the club. So from the club to a company owned by himself and his son-in-law, Michael Murray. They then sold it on again to another developer for quite a significant profit. That developer then went forward with these revised plans that they put forward to the city council. By that point, I was on the trust board, and myself and a couple of others worked to object as much as possible, really, to that development, knowing that it was not really a very good development and a good use of the land, but more so looking to try and do what we can to disrupt and stop it, because knowing that, you know, to safeguard the future of that club, that land could be absolutely vital. And so we did. On pure planning grounds, the local authority had not much they could do, really, given the weak planning policies. So, you know, for them to make that decision in line with the planning policies, they almost had to. But we could still try and object and try and seek that influence. I had a number of meetings with the developers at the time, trying to influence them, trying to even get them to change the scheme to accommodate future needs of St. James's Park potentially. They maintained at the time that it wouldn't inhibit the expansion of St. James's Park. I'm not sure how true that really is, given the solution, the engineering solution would have been phenomenally expensive. And then, yeah, over that got planning permission. They had their plans to get going. They insisted to us they were going to start on site the very next day, but obviously that wasn't true. They had an anchor tenant planned, who was going to take a law firm, who was going to take a big prime office spot on that building, and they pulled out. The pandemic, I guess, changed a lot of those types of decisions in business in the city, and therefore the company therefore struggled to raise the finance. I think they were relying on that big anchor tenant to raise the finance. that fell away. And then so the companies involved have been looking for different ways to finance it. We heard that they were looking to get the finance through the combined authority and the mayor, Jamie Driscoll, there. And thankfully, he decided not to give public money to this bad scheme in the wrong place. And that was only a couple of weeks ago. And then, last week we finally heard that the club had managed to get hold of that leasehold again, or certainly will get hold of it. I'm not sure if it's signed, sealed, and delivered. And that's really good news for Newcastle United, particularly because I'm sure, like many others, I'm keen for us to stay at St James's Park. But that site is a perfect gateway from the ground into the rest of the city centre. It really could be whatever the club want to be. And we hear they're going to make it a fan zone, is what they say in the interim, while they're exploring all of the options. But, I know that, when I met with the owners previously, I brought this up. I've mentioned it. I know that other people have as well. And what we were told at the time is we're looking at everything. So we're looking at literally everything, and they've held to what they've said. They're looking at everything, and they've secured that, and it could be massive for the long-term future of St James's Park.
Paul?
I can't add a great deal more. I don't know a huge amount about the background, but I do know that the club buying this land as opposed to taxpayers' money is fantastic for us as supporters. I think a fan zone would be brilliant, wouldn't it? I mean, the atmosphere outside the grounds now is fantastic anyway, but a fan zone there with some live music or some bars and some eateries would be great, because we know that all the pubs overspill anyway. So I think it would be really good across the board. Hopefully the long term would be to get some more seats in that ground so we can get more bums on seats inside St James's Park to give more people opportunities of getting in, which I think is vital,
Yeah,
and that's a segue, is it not, Lee?
No. One of the things for me on the Strawberry Place development, so I drive down the Felling bypass, having travelled up the A19 for every home game, and one of the things that I was really disappointed about was the fact that I was going to lose that view of St James's Park as I'm coming down past Heworth Metro Station. Every game, my lad sat next to me, we can see it on the horizon, what have you, and the idea that was going to be blocked off by office blocks and hotels and what have you, I just thought that was really, really, disappointing, not just for me and my son, obviously, but for people who live in the city and see St James's Park sitting proudly on top of it. So the fact that hopefully is now being taken away, that threat has been taken away, for me really is very, very good. Listen, if we want to become this Club of the North, as I've heard mentioned, or a super club as such, we have to be looking at sort of making a day at Newcastle United an event, not just for supporters, but for families, for kids and what have you. Anybody's been to the Etihad Stadium in the last few years, a day at the Etihad for a lot of people is an event. You get people going to the Etihad who potentially don't even have match tickets, just taking the kids to soak up the atmosphere. They have giant screens outside, they have bars, they have restaurants, they have entertainment on for the kids and what have you. And we've got to do that to draw in the next generation of supporters that we were so close to losing for 14 years. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing what the club's plans are, but I very much expect to hear some sort of style, some sort of fan zone sort of style environment that hopefully will just add to the already brilliant match day atmosphere.
Yeah,
I do. Okay, so what you call great news about Strawberry Place. So we are now going to come on to the thing that everybody has been wanting to talk about.
Topic.
And that is Carabao Cup Final tickets. Now, before we start picking up some of the questions that we've had fired in, and again, thanks for all of the questions that we've had, what I would like to do is just share a short video that's been recorded by the co-chair of the Trust, Alex Hurst. What Alex is trying to do here is just explain a little more about how the consultation process between Newcastle United and the Newcastle United Supporters Trust worked in relation to the League Cup Final ticket allocation. So I'm just going to click play and then we'll come back to you.
My name's Alex Hurst. I'm the Trust board member who the club contacted to have a chat about their planned distribution of Wembley tickets for the League Cup Final in 2023. Phone call took place probably just before the second leg against Southampton, and the club essentially put forward to me what was very close to the final thing that they put out in terms of periods. Feedback for the club from me was be as transparent as possible, do it as quickly as possible so fans could book transport and accommodation and anything else. Fans needed a real sense of clarity for what was going to happen moving forward. The Trust, we hadn't canvassed members on what they thought would be a fair way to do Wembley, so I had to rely on previous data that the Trust members had provided us, and that was the loyalty point system was fair, and the majority of Trust members believed that, and it was the best way to distribute certainly away tickets, and therefore I had to make a very quick decision on whether that was relevant for this process, and I did put that information forward to the club. And broadly speaking, the way that the club had done it in terms of rewarding a majority of season ticket holders, that was the fairest thing to do. The club's decision was that they wanted to reward attendance in this cup competition. That's a historic club. Preston, I understand, that goes back to 98 and 99. That's the club's decision. There are some people who disagree with that. There are some people who agree with that. I understand the club's always in a difficult position because there's always people who are going to miss out on tickets. I actually think that the club have done this pretty well. There are things they could improve on. They probably accept that themselves. This is a first time for the vast majority of people within the club. And overall, I think it's gone very well. There'll be people that disagree. People think it's unfair. Perfectly rational, reasonable things to think. On the whole, though, I think our member interests have been protected by the club, and the club have done a good job. They could do things better in future when they've got more experience. There are lots of things I know they wanted to do, not just for fans at Wembley themselves, but outside of that they haven't been able to do this time because of the short notice between the semi-final and the final. And I'm sure next time it'll be even better. But my view as a Trust board member is the club have done the best they can in the short time that they had available. We were happy to be part of that process, very privileged to do that as a Trust. Hopefully we could have a bit of a say before the club have kind of come to their plan in future, something we'll try and feed back to them. But overall, a job well done. Not everyone feels that way, but I feel like the vast majority of supporters and members hopefully feel that way. And looking forward to the final, as I'm sure all Newcastle United fans are. Thanks.
So interesting, what you call it, recording that from Alex, and I hope that puts a little bit more meat on the bones for people around how the process works. I'll fire up some questions in a moment. One thing I would like to say is this was, I think, on the part of the club, really unexpected. I don't think the club for a second expected to have this headache so soon after the takeover. Listen, it's been the most divisive subject, I think, since the takeover actually took place. Everybody's seen on social media what's gone on over the course of the past week or so. Some people in pots 1, some people in pot 7, various different arguments as to why people think that it's been done incorrectly. But at the same time, there's some people who do think it's been well done and the process has been fair. While I just flick through the comments, Paul, can I just get your thoughts on it, please?
Yeah, I think, I think we were forced into we being the club, Newcastle United, were forced into making an announcement very quickly because we got through on the Tuesday night. Manchester United got through on the Wednesday night. By the Thursday morning, Manchester United announced their ticketing. Now, I know they've not been in a cup final for 5 years or whatever, but they understand how to ticket, and we don't as a club. We've not been in a cup final since 1999. So it was always going to be a no-win situation for the club. Can't please all the people all the time, unfortunately, which is a shame. But I think, for me, I think it's fair because they've tried to accommodate as many people as they possibly can in terms of the ticketing. As a Trust, we weren't given a great deal of notice to give our opinions on it. But personally, if I'm a not on the board. I'm a fan. I think it's just a fair way of doing it. They've tried to get people in. Liverpool's ticketing last year, I think, was pretty similar. They had season tickets, loyalty points, however they work their loyalty points out, and people who've attended those cup games as well. I think they'll for next season, if we're going on cup runs, I think season ticket holders will be paying up their tickets and allocating them to themselves and their children and their own seats. I know a lot of people have upgraded into Platinum Club, etc. this season, and it's bitten them on the backside. It's been a really difficult one for everybody. It's a very emotive subject because every single Newcastle fan wants to be in that stadium come the 26th of February. But I think what the club have done is fair, and I think that they will become a lot more used to how to ticket for finals as we grow as a football club.
I think the club will have learned a hell of a lot over the course of the past week. There'll be scenarios that they didn't see coming. Sean's asked a really good question there. How many League Cup tickets have been allocated to each ballot? Unfortunately, Sean, that is not something that the club has actually shared with us. The club basically told us that periods 4 through to 7 were going to be a ballot, but in terms of whether that's going to be a filtered ballot, so it's weighted towards period 4 or period 5 over period 6 and 7. It's not something that the club has actually shared with us in terms of how that process is going to look. But again, I think the learnings will come hopefully in the future where the club will, I think, be a little bit more transparent in terms of how these ballots are going to work, because there's a lot of people out there at the moment who simply don't know. And one of the main topics of conversation I've seen regarding the ballots is, if somebody's in period 4 loses out to potentially somebody in period 7, how they're in period 4 think that's unfair. And I can understand that point of view. What I do think the club is trying to do with periods 4, 5, 6 and 7, however, and the reason that every one of those periods will go to ballot, I think the club is trying to open up the ticket allocation to as many different sort of types of fan. So members who, went to all the cup games, season ticket holders in period 4. I think the club is trying to not restrict the cup final allocation solely to season ticket holders, just to try. And again, they'll take the learnings from this, but what they are trying to do is just be as fair as possible to give everybody the best possible opportunity. Greg,
sorry, Lee, if I can just interject? I think there's 30. We don't know how many season ticket holders there are. Club won't give us that information. There's something between 32 and 35,000 season ticket holders at St James's Park. We don't know the exact number. There's about an allocation of 33,000 tickets. We know that a proportion of those tickets have gone to employees and to family members. We don't necessarily know the definitive percentage of that. Loads of numbers have been bandied about. But invariably, the club could have just said, every season ticket holder goes into a ballot, and there you go. If you get a ticket, you get a ticket. If you don't, you don't. If they'd done it that way, there would have been lots of complaints as well. I think what they've done is as you said, Lee, they've tried to allocate it to vary, so some people have been at the away game, some people have been at the home game, season ticket holders with X amount of loyalty points. So it's across the board as fairly as I think, or the club feel that it could possibly have done. I think next time round, let's hope it's next season, there will be a lot more time to be able to communicate so we can then come out to members, which we were just unable to do for timescales this time round, unfortunately, to ballot them. It just was an impossible situation.
And that leads us on to Samantha and Jessica's question there. Understand N.U.S.T were consulted. How was this discussed, decided on? Was it put to a vote? Unfortunately, on this occasion, there just simply was not the available time for us to go out to a member vote. Another thing that I think potentially Alex may or may not have mentioned in his video was when the club contacted the trust to share their ideas on what they were planning on doing, which ultimately is what actually they went with, by the way. When they came to us with that information, what we were told was this was absolutely 100% confidential information and it was not to be shared. So had we gone out and put that to members, it would have been in the public domain, and potentially going forward, the club might have shut up shop. They might not have shared anything with us. And we want to keep that relationship with the club going. The relationship with the club over the course of the past 12 months has been night and day compared to what it was. And when they asked us to keep the information they shared with us confidential, obviously we have to respect that. Yeah, so for us to actually have gone out to members and said, right, this is what the club is proposing on doing, we would have breached that trust and potentially put ourselves in a situation where the club didn't share anything going forward. So unfortunately, we weren't in a position, Samantha and Jessica, to actually go out and poll members on their thoughts around it. Let's come up to some more comments. So we've got one there from Toonami. Nothing needs change with loyalty points, but for years nobody was arguing last season. I see it from both sides of the coin. Obviously, there were tickets and season tickets were available pre-takeover and what have you. But at the same time, I think the club, and Greg, you might want to pitch in on this one from an away ticket point of view. I think the club realise. I've had conversations with people within the club, myself, where they acknowledge they need to do what they can to try and increase the way in which, or improve the way in which away tickets are actually sold. At the minute, it does feel like a closed shop for a lot of people, because unless you've got 80 away points, you're not getting to Bournemouth or whatever it was, 100 points, 150 points. And I think the club acknowledged that there's an issue there, and that has been raised. We went to an event that was attended by Darren Eales and Peter Silverstone, as well as Sarah Medcoff, the head of support services at Newcastle, and that was a topic that was actually raised and discussed on the night. So I think there's an acknowledgement on the part of the club that the away ticketing situation needs to be reviewed and probably improved. Greg?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think there is. I guess if you ask different people inside the club, you'll probably also get different views on that. I think the one thing that has to go without saying is that I think, in my view, the people who have, to use a phrase you see on Twitter, the people who've put in the miles, they deserve to be at the top of the queue for those away tickets. There is no doubt about it. I think those that have points that aren't going to games, I think, might need to be looked at to make sure that the people using those points, getting those points, are going to the games. And I know the club have talked about that. They've even done it in some cases already this season. I got a loyalty point for going to their friendly at Benfica. I had to prove to the club that I went before I was allocated my loyalty point. I don't think they're doing that for every game, but I think it's certainly something that they'll have to look at to make sure that the people who are doing the miles are the people who are getting the benefit of doing the miles, so to speak. And I think the club up until a year ago, as we know with the takeover, was run on an absolute shoestring in every single department. And it's going to take time for them to finish the review of operations and to really start implementing significant improvements in every area. I think we've heard from Darren Eales and others about, and Murdad and Amanda, about their complete end-to-end review of every single process in the club. And that's, from what we understand, still ongoing. So I think we will see improvements to the processes. We'll see improvements to the ticketing website. We've had someone in the chat today saying, can they get Apple Pay and other payment methods on there? I'm sure we'll see all that type of thing in time once they've had the chance to do that. But I certainly think we will see, improvements in that area. But like I said, in my view, the people who have been going, the people who go every single week with those loyalty points do deserve to have the first access to those tickets. But they should be going to the people who are actually putting the miles in, which I think in the majority of cases, because a lot of those people are my friends, not me anymore, because I got rid of my season ticket when I moved to London, and my 100 and how many loyalty points went down the drain, and I've only got one, and I just have to live with that. That was my choice, and I'm in the back of the queue now, like many others.
I think Dev's obviously there speaks on behalf of a lot of people, because a lot of people are in that similar situation as yourself, Greg, where they're stuck on X number of points. The opportunity never presents itself for you to increase that. And again, you get what you call it. Well, 2 years ago, you would have had the opportunity. That's in the past, unfortunately. People now want to go to the games more than they did potentially 2 years ago. And a lot of people find themselves effectively locked out from the away ticket.
Lee?
Yeah.
2 years ago, Mike Ashley had to give away 10,000 season tickets for free for half a season. Look at where we are now. Look, the demand is insane for tickets. We know that. We know that we will be opening tough discussions, I think, with the club around how tickets are allocated. How do we get more people into the ground? How do we get, sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters as the next generation of match goers at St James's Park, other than pre-season games, other than League Cup or FA Cup games, which, we know next season is probably they're not going to get in now, unfortunately. How do we do it? This is the kind of thing that we're going to be balloting members about when we start surveying as to the most important aspects and the most important things that we want to talk. And we know ticketing is going to be the absolute top. How do we get a fair ticketing policy for everybody? It's never going to be fair for everybody, unfortunately. But how do we make it as fair as possible so you've got as many happy people as possible? That's something that we will be discussing, and they are happy to discuss with us, the club.
I think a major problem the club has got and they need to be able to address is those season ticket holders who are knocking up 200 loyalty points, 250 loyalty points. But as you say, Greg, they're not actually attending the games. I think one of the, I think it might be Brighton, where 20%, I think, of away supporters don't actually receive their ticket in the post. They actually have to collect it from the ground. This is away supporters. They have to collect it from the Amex Stadium and they have to provide identification.
Can I just come in there? I think there's a couple of lenses you also have to look at this through. So every single individual is going to argue for whatever would suit them. Not every single individual. A vast majority of people will always argue for whatever will suit them to allow them to get a ticket. And that's why it's really important for the trust actually to be able to almost rise above that view. So I don't advocate the position that would best suit me. I advocate the position that will best suit the members of the trust. And that's why it's really important that we are also member-led and data-led. And we've last 2 years in a row, we've done our annual survey, and that's always included a lot of questions on ticketing. Alex alluded to it in his video about our members being in favor of the loyalty point scheme. And, one of the key things that we'll do after the final is we will canvass our members' feedback on how the final ticketing was allocated. But also, again, at the end of this season, we'll be running our annual survey, because when we go and talk to the club about these things, such as ticketing, having, it's no point going in and presenting Lee's view, my view, or whatever. We need to present a collective view of our members and for it to be backed up by data and by the people who this is really affected. And that is the people who are sat here taking up their Sunday night to be on here because they care. And we'll take that data into the club, and that'll really help us do that. So we will be in touch with our members to make sure we do have that, because it's really, really important. It's such an emotive issue. It's really, really challenging. There's no one single right answer, as there wasn't for Wembley. And we will do our best as an organisation to stand up for our members' interests.
It's an interesting comment from Sean there. Obviously, club shouldn't be saying anything off the record. I think that point was quite strongly put back to the club by Alex when this was shared with him, Sean. But obviously, as I say, if the club tells us that it has to remain confidential, we have to abide by that if we want to have that ongoing relationship with them. But again, I mean, when we've spoken to Alex, and Alex has told us that he did stress to the club that he was unhappy with the fact that we were unable to share this. So let's find a few.
On that, Lee, there's always, unfortunately, in the way that this business is, there's always going to be things that we're not going to be able to share. Now, we always want to share things, but that's just the way it is. If the club says to you, in a relationship, we're not going to engage with you anymore. Well, they're not that they have, but there's always going to be things that are confidential. We came in for criticism during the takeover for not publishing a letter that we wrote on QC wrote on behalf of the trust into the Premier League in favour of the takeover, setting out legal reasons why there's no impediment to it going ahead. We got a lot of criticism for not publishing that. Our legal advice at the time was that we couldn't publish it because it would be counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. There's always, unfortunately, going to be instances where some things do have to remain private up until a point of time. But I couldn't agree more. In an ideal world, we would be able to share everything with our members. But as soon as we share something with our members, everyone knows about it. It's in the newspapers. We've seen that before. So we do, unfortunately, occasionally have to keep things within the board, and then update the members as soon as we can. That's unfortunately just the nature of this business. I wish everything could be done transparently and in public, but sadly sometimes it can't.
Just on Vicky's question here regarding the percentage given to corporate. Again, unfortunately, at this point, I don't think that this is something that the club has shared with us. But this, rest assured, Vicky, this is something that the trust has really aggressively been challenging the club on, in terms of getting a better understanding on how corporate tickets are actually distributed. If you saw the latest members update, which is available on the website, in case you haven't seen the email, there's a piece in there where the club have actually replied to us and have given us a bit of information in relation to how players and staff and corporate tickets are actually allocated for league games. But on the subject of the cup final, Vicky, it's not an amount that the club has actually shared to us, unfortunately.
And on that, Lee, it's not just corporate tickets. In this instance, I think, the club has sponsors, and when you get to your first cup final in how long, all of the sponsors are contractually probably entitled to a certain amount of tickets. And we've seen very positively more sponsors coming on board since the takeover. And so the more sponsors you have, unfortunately, the more they're going to be contractually entitled to tickets. We need more sponsors because we need to comply with FFP and raise our revenue to compete financially. That's really unfortunate, but one of those things.
I think I agree with Greg there. It's that vicious circle. The more successful you become or want to become, the bigger sponsors, the more, I guess, that you lose a proportion of your tickets to these sponsors. It's something that we're going to have to, I suppose, get used to for away games, that there's going to be less tickets for us as away fans, or for those who go to away fans. But there's more money coming in the club, which means there's more that we can spend on players, etc., etc., etc. It's a vicious circle. I'd rather be where we are now than be where we were 2 or 3 years ago when we were shite and couldn't even sell our tickets.
Yeah. Just on Alan's comment here, the trust has had to get increased clarity from the club on the ballot process. I think, again, Alan, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, I think the club in itself is going to take a hell of a lot of learnings away from this process. There's things that they probably didn't foresee, scenarios that they didn't expect and what have you. And again, going forward, pray God, what you call it, we're in another cup final sooner rather than later. They'll take those learnings from what they've seen over the course of the past few weeks. I mean, one thing that immediately sprang to mind was we had people who were in period 1 who had children who potentially were in period 3. The original communication in terms of could that person in period 1 wait until period 3 to try and sort tickets next to their with their children, I don't even think that was clear in the original communication. And again,
it wasn't.
And again, it's all about the club not foreseeing that scenario when they released the original communication, realizing they've made the mistake and then clarifying it. And again, I think nobody at Newcastle, in my opinion, was expecting this so soon. It's probably something that they thought about. I think you might find that before the Leicester game at home in the quarterfinals, they might have started to think, we need to start putting something in place. But even then, that was only a 3-week period, I think, before the semi-final had been completed. So they've had to think on the feet. And as I said, they will take a lot of learnings. And if we do get to another cup final in the near future, I would expect it to be a far, more streamlined and clearer communication process.
And I think we will get communicated with, because we will be able to build up to it. The more successful we become, the more, I daresn't say expectant of getting the cup finals. That's a terrible thing to say, but the more likelihood is that we will reach more cup finals. So I think that there will be more consultation through, years of communication between the club and its trust and the other members that it is that it's in communications with as well. So I think that will help longer term. It's come back to, it's happened overnight. It's happened really quickly. They've had to do something. We got, as a trust board, we got no notice or very little visibility of it. And it went out, and that was it.
Yeah. That's
the reality of what happened.
Yeah, I think one thing that, listen, I've seen it on social media that we potentially guided the club on the ticket process. listen, guys, we would love to have that sort of clout with Newcastle United, where they're we're going to them saying this is how you should sell tickets. But this was very much very, very quick. These are our plans. Yeah. Can you give them a quick eyeball? Yeah. Scan through them and let us know whether you vaguely agree with what we're looking at doing. The trust looked at it and thought to ourselves, the club's trying to include as many different groups and as many different people as possible. So we said, we don't see a huge amount wrong with that. A lot of the issues we've seen came out after the event. And as I say, that's the learnings that the club are going to take from it. And so we'll be in another cup final soon anyway.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Glad, just seen that, Dev, glad you got one. Hopefully see you down at Wembley. A few more comments before we wrap up, guys. What have we got here? 75-25 out of what's left after corporate. Again, that's sort of it might be that, it might not be that, Ian. We don't know. The club again haven't communicated it. Jack's suggesting 20%. Again, we simply don't know. We don't. Let's have another couple. Here's one. Will the trust raise a review of likely points with the club on behalf of its members? At the moment, it's hard to gain points. Again, this is something that the club absolutely are aware of, Alan. It is.
If I can just interject with that one, Lee.
Yeah.
We will be going out to survey all of our members for the top 3 hot topics that we want to cover for the next 12 months effectively. We can't cover every single topic up with the club. It's impossible. So we're going to go for the top 3 that a survey will be coming out probably after the cup final. We think by the time we're going to be able to do it. And then we will be communicating all of those topics. We know that ticketing will be number 1 on that list, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Just come back to you on this one, Toby. It's I'm absolutely aware of it. Thanks for pointing it out. I'll remind you, it's the first time I've actually done one of these, but I'm absolutely aware of the fact that I do that repeatedly. Apologies. I hope you'll be drunk by the end of this broadcast if you ever drink every time I say that, believe me. Next comment was from Deb. Is there anything the Trust Club to do, anything about the rise in ticket scammers? I think everybody has seen online, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter or anything along those lines, tickets being purportedly placed on there for sale. What I would personally advise is, if you don't know that person, I wouldn't entertain and even enter into a conversation, let alone consider transferring any money. There is an issue with tickets, but it's all a symptom of the fact that the club is actually being successful at this moment in time. I would just say to everybody, tread carefully. Greg, you would look like you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I don't know if people saw that actually Northumbria Police put something out the other day warning fans about being careful, particularly around the Carabao Cup tickets, final tickets. So it's definitely something that's on the club and the police's radar. It's actually absolutely horrific. Actually, some of the things that you've seen, the scams that we've seen on Facebook, actually in particular, as well as Twitter. But my advice would be, if you do see it, if you can, report it. If you pass it on to us, we're happy to pass it on to the club. But go to the club directly, and yeah, don't buy tickets off these people. Clearly, a lot of absolute horrible people, taking money off, people, innocent people who just want to try and get a hand on a ticket. It's not on, and if we all do make some noise around about it, hopefully we can try and stop it, because it's these aren't Newcastle fans. These are criminals trying to make money out of Newcastle fans who want to see their football team play, and it's absolutely disgusting.
Question there from Jack. Are the clubs starting the fans forums again? Now, I don't know whether everybody's aware. I think most people will have heard around the fan-led review, which was led by Tracy Crouch. The Premier League, I think, Greg, has asked each Premier League club to commit to an engagement strategy.
Premier League standard, they're calling it, yeah.
Yeah, Premier League standard engagement strategy. And I know because we've had multiple conversations with Sarah Medcalf, who's the head of foot supporter liaison at Newcastle United. I know that the club are actively working on that engagement strategy, and I expect that's something that we are likely to be hearing from the club in the next few weeks. Greg, is that right?
I think it's one to watch in general. I think not just for the club but the football in general. The current government has committed to taking forward the actions from the Tracy Crowd fan-led review, and the trust was fortunate enough actually to be one of a few organisations that got 45 minutes with the panel. Myself and Alex put a lot of information to the panel primarily about how Newcastle United was run under Mike Ashley and how the takeover was being handled by the Premier League. The government's committed to that. They've just delayed it again by 2 weeks in terms of their response. You'll see in the Premier League obviously taking the charges against Man City. Quite a few people, media commentators, saying that looks a bit fast, looks a bit odd, the timing. Are they trying to ward off a independent regulator or what? But I think, when you look at football across the whole of the pyramid, something needs to change. We've maintained over many times that it wasn't fit to govern itself in terms of the Premier League. So I think it's one to watch in general, but we do need the government to step up and do what they say they were going to do. Not always the case, bearing in mind at the moment we seem to have a new government every 5 minutes. But the Premier League has committed to this new fan standard. That's not something that's forced from the fan-led review. That's their reaction to try and almost stop it, try and get ahead of the curve, try and improve those supporter engagements. But the one thing I would say with that and with the other engagement is the relationship the trust now has with the club is, light and day compared to what it was for the majority of my time on the board when, you barely got an answer for them. That to quote, I think Kevin Keegan, they'd say one thing, then they'd do another, or they'd say one thing and then do nothing. We now have an open dialogue where we can pick up the phone, we can get in touch, we can speak to them. We won't always agree. We don't always like the answer that we get, but that relationship really is building for the benefit of our fans. And when that standard comes in, I'm sure that we'll see further developments in that relationship and how engagement with the fan base, not just the trust, evolves as it'll need to.
Here's one from Sean I'm going to answer. Will the trust have an area in the new fan zone at St James's Park? If we do, Sean, I hope to meet you down there and we can have that drinking game that was suggested earlier for every time I say, what do you call it? Okay, so hopefully we'll get that zone and I'll see you down there for a drink. Quick question from, what do you call it? Jinkit on the possibility of staff standing at St James's Park. So obviously, I think people are aware of the fact that there's some safe standing in the away section up on level 7 that was installed early this season. One of the questions we asked in the annual survey earlier this year was, where did members believe would be the right place to, install safe standing at St James's Park? And from memory, I think the overwhelming response was, as people would expect, the Gallagher end. And that is information that obviously has been passed on to Newcastle United. And that's something that they will be looking at, I would have thought, in the course of the next few weeks and months, because safe standing's coming. I think there's a demand for it. I think the club acknowledged there's a demand for it. And hopefully we will see that installed, potentially even in time for next season. Pardon?
It's at Wembley.
It is at Wembley, yes. Yeah. Strawberry Corner, Dave has just suggested. Again, this is all feedback that we've obviously received and we've shared with the club, and I'm very, very hopeful the way the club is engaging with the trust that they will take that feedback on board. Okay, we've been going for 54 minutes. First shot, sorry for the technical issues to begin with. Believe it or not, me, Paul and Greg sat and spoke for 8 minutes before somebody dropped us a message and said, guys, you're not live. Again, I'll have my hands up. It's the first time I've actually hosted one of these broadcasts. We will be looking to do another one of these. We potentially, the week after, I think the Carabao Cup Final is probably most likely. Anybody who has any topics they would like us to discuss, feel free to drop us a message on Twitter, on social media, drop us an email at board@nufctrust.co.uk, and hopefully we will see you all again in a couple of weeks. So until then, enjoy yourselves. Hope we beat Liverpool next week, and then on to the big one on the Sunday, the 26th of February. Okay, cheers, guys.
Thanks all.
Thanks very
Cheers.
much. Thanks for coming on.
Cheers, bye-bye.